Do we know who from the planning commission was not going to be on? Did anyone say they want to be here? Okay.
Chris, I hadn't heard from anybody. As far as I know, everybody was going to be here. So
Okay. So it looks like we're missing Heather, Jackson, and Adam right now. Okay.
but we have Bruce. So, all is right with the world.
Okay. Well, we're going to start now. It looks like tech is ready. And so we will start with the agenda for the Herriman City Council and Planning Commission joint work meeting for Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. This meeting will be conducted electronically today. We will start off the work meeting with an approval of minutes for January 29th, 2020 joint work meeting.
I'll move to approve.
Approved by Clint, and I'm not sure how to do the all in favor, but I'll ask if there's anyone opposed, if that's easier. And seeing none opposed, we will move on to item 1.2. Those minutes were approved for January 29th, 2020. And we'll start with item 1.2, which is a discussion of an amendment to the South Hills Master Development Agreement. And we'll turn the time to city staff. And after city staff, I think they were going to have the developer take a couple minutes as well. So it looks like Blake was going to talk about this item. Do we have Blake unmuted by chance? So we're missing Blake right now. Do we have someone else on city staff that feels like they can take over this item, or?
So this is Jonathan, Chris. I'm just wondering if we don't hear from him next a little bit. I wonder, is it possible we come back to this item and I'll see if I can get in touch with him?
We can. If Blake's not going to be on for a couple minutes, does anybody know if he's going to be jumping on?
He was supposed to be on. I can probably do this item. I can fake it if you want me to.
Okay. Bryn, did you say you could go through this item?
Yeah, I think I can.
Okay.
I don't know what the PowerPoint looks like, but if you show it to me, I can talk about it. That makes John Lindsay feel really good, I'm sure.
Okay. Then we'll let you, Bryn, if you want to talk about the South Hills Master Development Agreement a little bit.
Okay. Let me look what I got. Okay, so can you guys all hear me okay? All right. South Hills, as you know, acquired pods 35 and 39 from Rosecrest. So they need to amend their master plan to add those properties. They've also acquired some property down by RSL. And they've also acquired some property up on the hill. The other thing that we wanted to talk about was the alignment of South Hills Boulevard and then density transfers between the properties. So again, on the left-hand side is the original plan. This was last amended in 2018. On the right-hand side, you can see the plan they are proposing. So again, the two commercial pods that we've talked extensively about. And then there is some property here. You can see where RSL was never added into their agreement, the actual facility. And then they've also recently purchased some property up above on the south side from Staker that they'd like to move into their master plan. So again, if you'll remember, their master plan says they can add property as long as it's adjacent into their master plan at their approved density, which is 4.5 units per acre. There's a little bit more than Rosecrest was. It doesn't mean they get those 4.5 units in that location. It means they get to add 4.5 to their bucket. And then they need a master plan to show where those units will go. Oh, look at Blakey, he's got fancy. Again, so you can see the tables. This was their original, and this is what they are proposing. So they are showing the units that would be added in the commercial. Again, we've talked about is 220-ish that goes into the two residential clusters in the commercial. They are also looking to increase the density on pod 5. You can see where they're showing some units going there. And then again, they've added this upper piece, and they're showing that as mostly a lower density, again, because of the slopes up there. So the other thing, the Planning Commission approved commercial design standards when they approved the site plans for pod 35 and 39, because their current design guidelines didn't include any commercial. So they've added those design guidelines. So we would want to add those to the MDA. 218 residential units come in because of pod 35 and 39. They're also adding about 31 acres that was part of RSL. And then there's some, again, the pods up above. The pod numbers have changed a little bit, so it's kind of hard to compare it apples to apples. But again, you can see the area up here where they're adding. Apparently that's what I have. So again, I believe this was just on tonight for your information. The developer, John, is on. If you've got questions, again, we've already approved the Planning Commission approved the site plans for 35 and 39. The council has not approved the rezone yet because we were looking at the kind of the master plan at the same time. I think we wanted to make sure it was all consistent. So the amendment would again add those properties, add the upper properties, and then change some of the densities as you're seeing here. Any questions for me? Or again, John may be able to answer them better than I can.
All right, thank you, Bryn.
What was the total increase in units?
So if you're looking at the just sheer numbers, it goes from 2,039 projected units to a total of 2,910, with currently 1,268 that are built out. Is that correct, Bryn?
Yep, that sounds right.
And John, did you want to take a minute and share any additional items that may be relevant to this right now?
Yeah, just as a real high level, to summarize what we're doing is we're staying in line with our MDA that allows us to make these changes based on property we acquire, and allocate the density and create the bank and try to show a placement for the units. So we're basically starting at that point now. Understand that we're starting, based on our acquisition of property in this area, we're starting to accumulate a lot of density that we probably are not going to be able to use. And so it's really a challenge for us to try to find a place to put them when I know that we're probably reflecting a little higher uses than what we are going to plan to use. And keep in mind, we will have to come back with an individual site plan of each of these areas showing the actual laid out density. All this is doing is giving us a place to try to lay the bucket or the bank of units that we're acquiring based on the MDA 4.5. And we're just trying to show where we can put it. In fact, the map that I see that's up there in front of you that showed proposed as of July 1st, it's changed where we're trying to update more of the medium density pink in the upper area. But I can tell you the plan that I'll be bringing in is still going to be very low density lots up in that area. We just have to try to drop those units and show that they're going somewhere. So, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. I think a lot of this amendment that we're working on, we've already discussed, including design guidelines like Bryn had mentioned. And there's just a few small other tweaks to it that we think we're putting together a good plan. we've listened to planning commission's requests about the city not wanting attached housing, and we agree with that. I think that Herriman might be a little overwhelmed with attached housing, and we're looking at offering a product that's closer to the corridor, that's not your typical attached or higher density. It's going to be like what we did in Pod 2 and Pod 4, which was zone medium density townhomes, but we're just going to build your typical 5,000 square foot lot, 5-foot setbacks, and more entry level homes, so that residents at Herriman that want to graduate from an apartment into a home have a starter home available. And we just think there's a lack of market, especially in Herriman, for that product. So just to let you know, that is what we're planning on doing down in those lower areas, and not proposing more apartments or townhomes. So,
All right, thank you, John.
yeah, no problem.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Not unless I got Bruce Baird on here as well, our attorney, who's trying to help make sure that we're in line with our MDA, and unless he has anything he wants to add.
We've submitted just a day or so ago a small update to the land use master plan table regarding pods 18, 19, 20, and 21. And they are probably going to be, that amendment will show them at 0 units. It'll leave the units unallocated, but those units won't have any baseline entitlement on them. Staker will, the potential purchaser of that will have to come in and get any entitlements that they want for that. And there's a parallel amendment for Rosecrest that takes pods 35 and 39 out of the Rosecrest amended and restated master development agreement, so they can be put in this development agreement. You can't really have 2 development agreements over top of the same piece of property. So we've submitted a parallel agreement. My understanding is there are some changes that your city attorney has suggested in that document. I have not had a chance to look at it. I just found out about it this afternoon, but Chase and I are working quite cooperatively on making sure that these documents marry up. We're trying to catch some clarifications in the numbering of amendments and the accounting for acres and documents, so that we can sort of start afresh with these 2 amendments and catch up on some things that seem to have been missed a few times in the last couple amendments. They're non-substantive, those cleanups, I believe, but we thought it'd be an appropriate time to clean those things up so that we're all singing from the same hymn book on page 1, as it were.
All right, thank you, Bruce. And guys, it's a little bit easier for me if you mute yourself, and then when you unmute yourself, I'll know that you want to share some comments, so we don't have guys talking over each other. So when you unmute, I'll just know that someone has a comment or something they'd like to share in regards to this. At this time, thank you to the developer for sharing additional information, but let's turn to the City Council and Planning Commission for additional comments and discussion on this particular item. And Brent, if you can make it where I can see everyone. And Steve, do you have something to share? Steve looks like he tried to unmute himself. Is he muted from your side?
No, I'm just turning off my audio to my phone because I'm not picking it up very well over the computer.
Okay. And then I just see initials. Is that you, Brent, underneath there?
Yeah, the communications, I don't know if they're in the room with you, but they would have to adjust what you're seeing on the screen. I can't control that.
Okay, I can see everyone now. So are there any thoughts on this item from City Council, Planning Commission? Clint?
Yeah, I'll just, obviously we appreciate
I
the
can't
developer, being here to help answer any questions tonight. I think just one of the things I wanted to reiterate is my appreciation that they recognize the type of product that I think is most appropriate to going forward, and that is a detached type product. I think we all have heard our fair share of, some of the views that are out there of the other area, especially down around Real, and the number of, multifamily or townhouses, condos that are down in that area. And I think I appreciate the fact that they recognize that, and recognize too that, it's one thing to put units or unit count on a table without having a complete development plan in place, and recognizing that that doesn't mean you're absolutely going to be able to use those units. But like I say, I appreciate at least their intent, what they've presented to us thus far. I think we just need to again look to our attorneys to make sure that it's in line with the previous MDA and follows what was spelled out there, and how those units are accounted for and placed in there. And then obviously we work through the unit count and utilization of those as we move forward.
Thank you, Clint.
Chris, this is
Michael?
I wonder if we should have a brief conversation about process on this amendment. Parts of this proposal has been seen by the Planning Commission and has been recommended for City Council consideration. The land use table portion has not. And I know in the past it's been our effort or our intent to have a Planning Commission recommendation for the City Council on MDA amendments. I'm assuming we probably need to take this whole bundle back to the Planning Commission, have a formal review and a recommendation. Is that consistent with what the Commission and Council expects staff to coordinate on this project?
I'm seeing some head nods. So from the normal process of going through the Planning Commission for recommendation to the City Council, I think Michael's just making sure and confirming with the team within the city staff, and I don't see the lawyer on here, Chase. Maybe he is on here. Oh, he is on here. There he is. But is that the process that we will be going through in this case?
With the South Hills amendment, yes. We, I believe, and I would have to confirm this, I believe we've already discussed or council's approved the amendment to the Rosecrest MDA. And we are just finalizing, going back and forth on a few of those things that Bruce mentioned. They're non-substantive items. Just clarifying a few of the items that council gave us direction on, and finalizing that.
All right, thank you. Then there's one thought that I had, and it's not maybe as relevant to the overall scope of this, but it was something that just came to mind based off of the overall city. I know that the Herriman Arts has been looking for a place to place their facility, and I know some talks were a little bit north of here. I do also know, when I really thought about the process and locations and different things like that, that would have a huge pull of citizens' dollars that go into other commercial entities, because we have none located next to some of those other locations by Mountain View. And there may be opportunities to look at some other areas that are farther north or maybe south towards this actual development. And I know as we're looking at the master development agreement, that might be a time to talk about it. And so that's just some thoughts that came across when I was looking at it, that maybe City Council can consider or at least start to think about. I'd much rather have a nice facility like that near more of our commercial, that can actually have individuals come, see a show, stay in the Herriman city limits and spend money in the Herriman city limits, instead of going to a location and then spending their money in other cities. So that was just a thought that I had while looking at this. And I know it's a little bit ahead of it, but that might be something to discuss further on. So is there any other thoughts in regards to item 1.2? If there's none, then I'll move on to item 1.3, which is an update on the Herriman City General Plan, and that'll be an update by Michael.
Thank you. And we actually have Susie Pethram with FFKR who will be providing this update. I know that this process has been longer than any of us have wanted, but in talking about some of the things that have happened, especially during the last 6 months, I'm hopeful that the final product will actually be more robust than we had originally intended. We've benefited from some additional surveys. Under the direction of the City Council, we did 2 analytically defensible surveys through Y2 Analytics. And then we also benefited from an additional survey that Utah State University conducted in the city of Herriman regarding health and community aspects. We've also have overlapped the general plan with the development of the transportation master plan. And we certainly have benefited from an updated parks plan that was approved last year by the city council. So all in all, we're hopeful that the final product is going to be a good tool for the city to use. I've been working with Susie as much as we can through the COVID. That has certainly had an impact on our community engagement, of course. But I'll go ahead and turn over the time. I think Susie is actually going to control the presentation from her computer. If Jonathan, our communications guru, can set that up for her, that would be great.
Thank you, Susie.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just while John's getting it set up so that I can share my screen, just wanted to thank Michael for his guidance in this process. And I think the timing on the agenda is great because I think it gives us an opportunity to understand how we can make the general plan function as just a better tool when you're faced with making decisions, whether it's about zone changes or adjustments to the master development agreements, but really have the general plan provide you with a better set of tools that define clear criteria for making decisions and provide specific action items and implementation strategies. So we want this plan to help essentially put the city in the driver's seat a little bit and have you be prepared to guide these master development plans and really get the development coming that represents the vision that has been pretty well articulated by the community through all of these different outreach processes. And looking at the update, I've just got a couple of slides to sort of give you an update on the different types of outreach that's been occurring, and then just share a summary of the findings from the second statistically valid survey that was conducted by Y2 earlier this spring and shared with the Planning Commission in June last month at their meeting, and just give you a sense of what we are taking away from that survey to help craft the draft document that we'll be sharing with the technical advisory committee.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Susie. One second, I think Clint may have a question.
Sure.
Oh, you put yourself on mute now, though.
That was an inadvertent bump. I apologize.
Okay, you kept hitting it. You hit it like 4 times, so I thought he definitely wants to say something.
Definitely wanted to say something. Well, he'll probably have something to say.
All right, sorry about that, Susie.
No problem. Okay, so just to double check that the screen is sharing, I'm going to go into the full screen mode for the presentation. And okay. All right, so it looks like we're up and running on the presentation. So as Michael mentioned, this is just an update on where we are in the process. And what we've heard so far has really been a great lesson in the diversity of people that live in Herriman. Sometimes it seems like you hear all from one side or the other side, but the range of events that we've heard from and the places that we've been have really given us a good perspective on the diversity that is present in Herriman with the demographics, the type of families and people that live there, and their needs. And that helps us validate some of the decisions that are being made that not be popular in one area, but they might in another. But collectively, we're looking to help the city with their decisions that community-wide are what the city and the Council and Planning Commission feels are in the best interest of the city. So this is just an update to a presentation that we made last year and where we are with the events and the outreach. Overall, between all of those different open houses and the pop-up events and community events, as well as the surveys, there's been over 15 different opportunities for people to provide input, including the Community Builders Book Club that Michael's been facilitating. We've been at numerous locations around the city, moving out from just the city hall. We've been out in the parks, at the rec center, the grocery stores, and just meeting those small groups in people's homes, and feel like our estimate is that we probably reached over 3,000 people throughout the outreach process. And over the course of the different methods, we probably garnered, in excess of 25,000 different opinions. And those, range from whether people are putting dots on those boards or writing down ideas at the open houses, or providing the survey responses, whether they're multiple choice or open-ended, but just really a wide range of input that we've been able to take and weave into our recommendations for the general plan. So these are some of those events that we've been out to, and there's probably a couple that aren't on there. Michael just mentioned that they had another book club meeting last night. So those are things that we'll reflect in the plan document, just to show people, where we've been, what type of outreach we've received. So what I wanted to take just the next 5 to 10 minutes is give a briefer summary presentation of what Y2 presented to the Planning Commission last month. And this is just the second community survey that the Council and Planning Commission both had a pretty good hand in developing the content. The goal of this was to build off of that first survey that we did that was intended to be fairly broad in nature and get bigger picture ideas and visionary. With this one, we wanted to really dial into some details. And I think that was reflected in the way the questions were structured and the types of comments and responses that we got. So just getting into it, here's the overview of their methodology. They had the survey open for about 2 weeks in the beginning to middle of May. We structured it so that it wouldn't take people too long, and 17 minutes was the average amount of time that people took to complete the whole survey. We had just over 500 citizens respond. That's a little bit fewer than we had in the first survey, but I think it also reflects the amount of detail that was in the questions and responses. So it required a little bit more of an investment into providing those responses than the first survey. Pretty good representation. They feel like the responses were weighted to represent plus or minus 4.2 percentage points in their findings. And so what that tells us is that we feel very comfortable in using this material to help frame the content of the general plan and the recommendations of those policies. So the 5 findings that Y2 pulled out: outdoor recreation is just really a top priority. And I think that's something that we sort of knew, and I think that was a comment I think that some of the planning commissioners made, is that a lot of the things from this survey confirm things that you probably already assumed or knew about Herriman residents, but that's great. So it confirms that the things that you think are important to residents really are. So the outdoors and protecting the character of the city, but also there's a wide understanding of the need for bringing in economic development opportunities and having that balance of what happens in the development arena. There are some differences based on how long people have lived in Herriman. And so those that are in the community, they've been there for 10 years or longer, have a little bit more value on the character of the community rather than seeing new amenities come in. So newer residents have a little bit more favorable view of the different types of housing and the mix of development that has been coming in and that is likely to come in the future. Overall, though, the residents in general feel that the city is really there to provide a home base for them. They want those opportunities for recreation, access to the outdoors, as well as some of the food and amenities that are nearby. But they don't feel as strongly about having Herriman turn into an employment base for them personally. I think there is still interest in having employment opportunities. Tech companies locate in the city as a means for economic development. But by and large, residents feel comfortable commuting outside of the city to their job destination. The unique setting of Herriman is something that residents recognize can be an opportunity for attracting tax dollars from visitors. And we'll see in some of the maps later where they prefer this development to happen. I think there's an understanding of some of the unique opportunities in the foothills with the types of recreation or amenities that might happen there. But as far as capturing some of the revenue from those visitors, having it located closer to the Mountain View corridor, which makes sense from an access standpoint as well. One of the questions that we were really hoping to define with the survey is what people considered their neighborhood to be. And we asked them to define it by different modes of transportation, car, bicycle, and the last one is on foot. So that gives us just a sense of when we're asking questions about, do you want to see this in your neighborhood? Or how do you feel about amenities, services? We get a better understanding of what that means when we're talking about neighborhood.
Hey, Susie, on that number 5, on that slide, it said 8 minutes by car, 12 minutes by bike, 17 minutes by car. Is it 8 minutes by car or 17 minutes by car?
I'm pretty sure it's 17 minutes by car, but we'll see it in the next slides. I remember that this was a typo. So one of the last slides breaks it out. And so I will be able to go back in and fix this.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is just a map showing the geocoded location of the responses, just giving a good geographic representation of all of the different districts that you guys represent and where people live that answered the survey. So that also just provides us with a pretty good comfort zone of knowing that we've reached residents from a lot of the different neighborhoods and the different types of communities that are there in Herriman. So we've got 3 different layers of priorities that we were trying to capture in this survey. The first one, the community priorities. Economic development came out as the top priority for the city as a whole, but also when you look into the different districts and the different colored districts that you can see on the screen. Hang on, I'm just trying to get the little meeting controls out of the way. So just going back to this one a little bit. I'm just having some mouse pad control issues. Okay. So on these, the numbers that are shown are the averages. Those lower numbers indicate the higher level of importance. And so we asked people these questions in different ways. We wanted to know, things that are the most important or least important about each of these categories. But in the end, we also asked people to rank, when you're looking at all 6 of these different areas of interest and value, what's the top issue as far as your key priority, and economic development came out on top, except for in District 3 was the one that there was a slight advantage on preserving and enhancing community character. Over on the right, just showing sort of the differences based on age of the respondent, a little bit of difference, those under 40 and over 40. So just to reiterate that summary presentation, that when you're looking at the component that was rated the most important in each of these questions, the key theme is those natural open spaces, outdoor activities, and recreation. So those are themes that came through in multiple perspectives, whether it was the amenities or bringing in economic opportunities or preserving community character. Some of the things that people didn't feel were quite as important, the light industry and manufacturing, when they were given options for economic development, that came in at the bottom. For community character, distinct streetscapes, people didn't feel was as important. And then just some of those other things about the block parties and bringing in a daytime population. So here's a slide that just shows a little bit of difference between the newer residents and the older residents, where the shift is in the priority when they're ranking how important each of these different categories is. Preserving and enhancing community character, as we mentioned before, a little bit more important for those residents that have been in Herriman for 10 years or longer. And also a little bit more important for residents that identified as female. Moving on to the neighborhood priorities. This is when we were trying to dial in on some of those details. And here we have that answer to that question, Sherry, that the driving is the 8-minute average. And so somebody considers their neighborhood to still be an area that they can access in approximately 8 minutes or less. The dots reflect the range of answers, but those boxes around it is the statistical sort of comfort zone for each of those averages. So 8 minutes of driving, 12 minutes if you're on bike, and 17 minutes if you're walking.
So it's 17 minutes walking, Sherry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. So that's, what's that is telling us is that when we're talking about providing neighborhood services or neighborhood amenities and the types of those amenities, it just gives us a sense of how people are willing to travel to access those and how much time investment they're willing to make to access different amenities. And we'll see a little bit more on the next slide about the preferred mode of access based on the type of amenity or service that they might like to see in their neighborhood. And so if it's something that's based around community spaces or recreational activities like the parks and trails or a yoga studio, those are things that people, by and large prefer to walk to or bicycle. When you get into the food and drink and the shopping and entertainment, that's when you start to see the preference to driving to access those types of amenities. But coming down into the transportation, and that's looking at access to that regional transportation system and reinforces the effort to do an active transportation plan for Herriman, is that walking and bicycling to get to those transportation nodes is the preferred mode of transportation. So when we're looking at the priorities for the city as a whole, the preferred development opportunities that people are most interested in are those shopping and restaurant opportunities, as well as the community spaces. The idea with the map was to try to get people to identify locations that they felt would be good locations for locating some of these if they were not directly in their neighborhood. So we've defined what people's neighborhood is, but outside of their neighborhood, where would be the good opportunities for locating these? And there's probably like a little bit of shift on the geocoding of these, but by and large, I think you can see that the Mountain View corridor, the town center, and the Anthem commercial area, these are locations where the majority of people feel like those make great locations, but you also see some of those purple dots spread out throughout Herriman. And so those are some areas where we can start to look at some of those smaller neighborhood nodes. If there's a major transportation intersection or a minor one, that might be an opportunity to locate some of those smaller neighborhood activities or services in other areas of Herriman outside of the core town center and along Mountain View. When we're looking at how to capture that visitor revenue, like we mentioned earlier, a similar pattern, but a little bit more strongly located along the Mountain View corridor and some of those key access points along the east edge of the city. So when we're looking at talking about improving air quality, and I think this is the last slide summarizing the survey, that the key approach for improving air quality is really adding amenities and destinations within neighborhoods where there is a planned mix of housing types in the immediate vicinity. So not necessarily your lower density residential neighborhoods that are up in the foothills, but those areas of Herriman where there's a mix of housing types and a little bit more density, having some amenities and destinations located within those neighborhoods was the top response for the impact that Herriman residents felt they could make on improving regional air quality. So that is the last slide. Chris, if you want to see if there's any questions about the survey, we can leave the screen up for a little bit in case there's any slides we want to go back to.
Absolutely. Planning Commission or City Council, are there any questions you want to ask Susie while she's here?
Would it be possible for us to get a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, in fact, we will provide the entire PDF presentation that Y2 made to the Planning Commission. We'll have a PDF of that available for you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, Sherry.
I do have one. And this is an awkward question. I apologize for it, but literally, I think we've been working on this the whole time I've been in office for 2.5 years. And I'm getting pushback from residents. I mean, to the point where I go, oh yeah, we are still working on this. And so I need to understand when we're going to come to some conclusion here. I don't mean to sound overbearing here, but it's just that I know we went through this COVID thing and that set back a little bit, but literally I believe ever since the referendum, we've been working on this. So when's the end date?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think one of the things that we, are aware of is that there was a lot of the other planning efforts that we wanted to make sure we reflected in the general plan. And so with some of that detailed information from the transportation plan, for example, we're able to incorporate that into the general plan. With the feedback from the survey, we've got a draft that we're looking to get out to our technical advisory committee in the next week or so, have them, dive into it, and then, looking to figure out the best online platform for getting the draft out into the eyes of the community so they can provide us some feedback. But we feel like we're in good shape to move it forward pretty quickly from here on out. We've got a great format set up for the plan document and are excited to get it out. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it looks
Brody,
like Brody. All right.
Question.
I was trying to remember who BR was.
Oh yeah, sorry. I know I was kind of on the general plan advisory committee. Just curious. I know we talked about looking at each subdivision and what amenities we'd want for each. I guess I don't know if we categorize it as subdivisions, but locations. I don't feel that we've kind of gone over that again since we talked about it initially. Just curious if we're going to have any follow-up for the meetings regarding that piece, and then just really dive deep into the recommendations as far as if we're going to propose changing zones, how we link those to the feedback we've gotten. Just curious there.
Yeah. So with the amenities, I think what you're asking is how with these different neighborhoods we're looking at how the future land use map might reflect some of the amenities that people are interested in seeing. And that was really the point of this second survey, was to get a little bit more detailed information about how the different areas of Herriman responded differently to the types of amenities and the mix of amenities in those locations. And so that is information that we're incorporating into the future land use map and linking it into broader neighborhood areas to show what the different neighborhood types are in Herriman.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for because we talked about neighborhoods and what amenities are each neighborhood looking for because they're kind of, some are brand new, some are historic,
Right,
and
exactly.
make sure we capture the desires for those neighborhoods so that they're places where people want to stay.
Yeah, exactly. And that, yeah, like I said, that was the idea of getting the detailed information out of the survey, is so that we felt like we could make those recommendations and have the community input to back up those recommendations in the plan.
Yeah, so kind of along Sherry's comment, just curious as far as timing, like when is it expected that the Planning Commission will be able to review the recommended general plan, any recommended zoning changes?
Yeah, so we'll get it out to the TAC first, and then start to get it to the Planning Commission soon after. I know that you have a meeting coming up on August 6th. I didn't know if there was a second meeting planned for August. I don't know if I saw that on your calendar.
There'll be a meeting on August 20th. And I have already conveyed to Susie that the Planning Commission wants multiple meetings reviewing the draft plan. At least that was the direction that I had heard from the commission recently, that they would like to make sure they have plenty of time to review it and work on it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. Appreciate that.
So is it realistic, Susie, that let's say the second meeting in August that we'll have, I guess, a more complete draft of the general plan to start diving into the details? Because I think accessibility, amenities, and even from an economic perspective, that they're leaning a little bit away from large retail box stuff and more of I guess, a service-based restaurants and different types like that tend to be what a lot of our community is looking for. But putting together these zones will make sense for this and the general plan, because I feel like we're talking a lot more about the details and not so much about the big picture, because I think the details will fit into the big picture, and that's really what the general plan is for. And so you think at least the first draft is coming at the second meeting in August?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And then from there, I guess this might be a question for Michael and Susie, but obviously there may be one or multiple meetings that the Planning Commission goes over it. But for Sherry and the City Council, let's say that it does take, I mean, we're willing to meet more than once from the Planning Commission side, and to have longer meetings to get this out because we know the importance of it, but to get it to the City Council. What's a realistic timetable in being able to dive through this and really get it to the next level of the City Council so we can get something out there that I guess is more of a plan for the city and because it helps everyone, obviously. Do you think that's a month, 2 months out after that? Because I know the Planning Commission will go through it pretty quick and they'll stay on top of it, but I also don't know from the perspective of staff and you as well, how stretched you guys are in being able to continue to prepare it.
Yeah, and I think part of that in between, the Planning Commission and the City Council is, concurrently with having it out to the community, but being able to do probably more of that in an online format will probably allow us to actually move it through a little bit quicker, because we can be getting comments as we go along. So if we say, we do a second meeting in September with the Planning Commission, probably usually takes like 1 to 2 weeks to turn it around and make some of those changes, incorporating the updates from the Planning Commission before we bring it to the City Council. So probably the end of September.
Okay.
Michael, does
Sherry, is that helpful?
Yep, very helpful. I just need to, because I just need to feel like we're moving along a little bit more and have some kind of solid dates so I can feed back to residents this need.
So I think the goal is the end of September, having it in front of the city council, as far as if we're able to get through it from the planning commission perspective and then get it back to you guys. That'll give us at least 2 meetings if we look at it from the end of August and the beginning of September that we can look at it.
Sounds good. Yep. I just feel like we need to start getting some closure on this and get moving along with it.
I agree.
Agreed. Yeah.
Agreed. Thanks, Sherry.
Chris, this is Adam. I just want to make sure we get a chance to actually, if we can do, I know normally we have to get our packet like the week before and stuff, but in this case, I really want to try and get some time to actually review it before we go and discuss. So please make sure we get that.
Yeah, we'll probably need for sure at least 7 days before.
Yeah.
Mayor Watts?
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm in agreement with Sherry. In all honesty, I'd like to have this done by the end of the year, where the council has a chance to review and make a decision on this by the end of the year, so that we can start our next year all in alignment with the new plan. So if we can start working towards setting some reasonable goals, that we can make sure that we are on some sort of a timeline, roughly that, so that the council can start looking at this and start really getting that input from the residents after they've seen a copy of it, and we can start heading towards that. I think I'm in a complete agreement with Sherry that we got to get this done.
Thank you. Thank you, Susie. Are there any other remarks or comments or questions in regards to this? All right, then let's move on to item 1.4, which is a discussion of the M1 manufacturing zone at Rockwell Landing. And Michael, I have you on here to discuss from the city staff perspective. You're muted right now, Michael.
Thank you. I just need to get our presentation loaded. I assume that's coming from City Hall.
They're working on it right now.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
There we go. So this was an item that just came to the city staff's attention within the last couple of weeks. A developer in our community was attempting to lease space in an M1 zone to essentially a dance studio. And it prompted a potential M1 text amendment that the city's going to be reviewing. So the land use of a dance studio is part of the definition of personal instruction service. And you can see how this category, and this again is right from the city code, includes a variety of uses, art, music, schools, driving, computer instruction, gymnastics, very martial arts training. So all of these different things fall into this personal instruction service. Within the M1 zone, and this is a snapshot from our code, you can see across the top row where personal instruction service is allowed. So it's a permitted use in the C2 zone. It's conditional in the MU and MU2, but it's not allowed at all in the M1 zone. Now, one of the reasons why this has created a little bit of confusion is you'll look just right down in the middle of this table. And again, this is just one section out of our table. The table is much larger. You can see recreation and entertainment indoor and outdoor. Both of those uses are allowed as a conditional use in the M1 zone. So for example, the DBAT facility that many of you are familiar with, that was allowed as an indoor recreation facility in the M1 zone as a conditional use. So the thinking is, really, is there that much difference between personal instruction service and a facility like DBAT? And so the property owner of that development has submitted this text amendment for the city's consideration. So again, that'll go to the planning commission first. They'll make a recommendation. It'll come to the city council. We wanted to have this on for just a quick discussion tonight. Just looking long term, the flex spaces are certainly very popular commercial spaces in not only in our community, but just everywhere. That's one of the few commercial projects that you continue to see being developed and occupied. So they're very popular. In fact, item 1.6 tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about those types of uses elsewhere in the city. So maybe there's a question of, if our M1 zone is really supposed to be a manufacturing zone, we're looking for like jobs, something that's a little noisier, has storage needs and things like that. Do we maybe need to look at creating some type of a flex space zone, or maybe we have two different categories of an M1 and an M2 zone, where the M2 is a little more more intense? Do we create an all new zone? I'm not sure. It's just something that we're going to have to start studying and looking at. The main concern is we want to try and prevent incompatible uses within the same zone. And for example, in our M1 zone, that's where we do allow as a conditional use our sexually oriented businesses. Now that's an extreme example, but would we be comfortable as a community having an SOB regulated business next to potentially a dance studio or some other personal instruction use? So do those really fit together in the same zone? So that's the larger issue that we're going to have to be studying. I do agree that really there's not a lot of difference between indoor-outdoor recreation or indoor recreation and this personal instruction. But that is what's going to be coming to the Planning Commission and City Council on agendas very soon. Any question or feedback about this larger issue that you want to direct staff on right now at this point in time?
I have one just before it comes back, maybe you can look into. I'm more interested in, it looks like there's the music school, the dance studio as well, and then also driving. Because having cars driving through the parking lots for like a driving ed or something like that, I question if that would cause problems, depending on the other MI uses that are in that area. And then also if there would be a major problem if there's a certain business and right next door is a music studio that's constantly playing, and how that would work, or a dance studio that's constantly playing loud music. I'm just wondering if that would possibly have negative effects on the other businesses located in that area. So that was the only thing that I was curious about. Past that, it seemed like, because I am pretty familiar with how these how these type of manufacturing or little areas are being used across the state, and it seems like they are being used in all these ways almost.
They are, I agree. I failed to mention that the request is to make this a permitted use in the M1 zone. So maybe part of it is what are we classifying within the personal instruction service itself? Maybe we need to break out some of these other uses into their own separate category. I don't know. I think the driving instruction, typically that would probably be an office where they would also store vehicles. And then, normally they're doing the driving instruction actually on city roads. I don't know that
Jared,
necessarily would be an actual driving facility in the M1 zone, but
sure. Jared, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick. It sounds like Michael's asking us two separate questions, right? There's an application at hand that wants us to change this to be a permitted use. My answer to that is no. If we were to do so, it would be a conditional use for all the reasons that you just mentioned, right? If it's not compatible with those things, it would be conditioned on what's around it. The second question is, do we want to look at doing these zones differently? I'll say, do as much work as you want to do there, Michael. I'm happy to look at whatever zones make.
And
that would be my opinion to weigh in on is if we allow it as conditional but not permitted.
sure. And Jared, the one thing that we have to watch out for from the planning commission side is if it's a conditional use, we can place conditions on it, but we still approve it. Meaning if it's a music one next to it, we typically say, okay, yes, you can have it here if you put a sound barrier wall on this side or something like that. Typically, it's not we're not allowed to approve it. We can do it based on conditions. And so.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
David?
So I agree with Jared that if we were to consider it in this zone, for me, it would absolutely have to be conditional. It couldn't be permitted. My opinion is actually that I would prefer it not to be in the same zone and that we have its own zoning, particularly because, as Michael pointed out, with the sexually oriented businesses, just for the public's notice, it's very clear, the law is very clear that we have to have a zone that we allow those type of businesses in, and that we have to allow those businesses if they come, as long as they meet the basic requirements of other businesses in the city. And so in order for us to control where those go, we've put them in the manufacturing zone. I'm very, very hesitant to put businesses that primarily serve our youth in the same zone that would have those sexually oriented businesses. And so I'm okay, if we want to find a way to make that make that to where there's similar spaces that can be there. But I would want to find a way that we could better control, putting those types of businesses next to each other. And the best way I can see or avoid putting those next to each other. And the best way that I can see that happening is by having, the true zoning control that comes with having it as a separate zone. So my opinion as we move forward and we start to work towards, finding a solution, because I think the request from this particular applicant is completely reasonable. I don't have any problem with the type of businesses going in that area. That in no way is the issue. The issue for me is making sure that we're controlling, the types of businesses that go next to each other, particularly when those businesses serve our youth. If it wasn't, that's why we put it in a manufacturing zone, because generally those don't serve the youth population of our community. And so I want to, avoid that conflict. So that we don't have, for example, a strip club right next to a dance studio. There's, or a martial arts studio or a music studio. That doesn't make any sense. And I don't think anybody in our community would want that. So to make sure that we have that control, I'd be looking for a complete zone, and not just allowing a permitted use in that area. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. All right.
Chris, this is Clint.
Okay, Clint.
I'll just briefly kind of echo what has already been said. One, to Jared's point, I do think, again, to make sure some of those checks are in place. If we look to keep it in the same zone, it would need to be a conditional use. But the point is very, very fairly taken that the difference between a dance studio and indoor baseball instruction, it's all still individual instruction. So I think the request is very reasonable, but I do think that it is worth the time for staff to look into again, those, and bring those options back to us of does it make sense in this zone? Does it make sense to create its own zone and how we handle these to, again, potentially avoid some of the issues that the mayor just talked about, but also, again, buffering from light businesses. So I definitely think it's a reasonable request for us to look at as a city, and would support the staff doing some work and bringing us some recommendations.
Yeah, and honestly, I think this is a very natural issue for a rapidly growing city that is beginning to attract more and more commercial users. We just need a finer grain commercial, code system to allow for, this new type of development that we're seeing popularized everywhere along the Wasatch Front. Up and down I-15, you see these spaces, and they're very successful. So we want to accommodate them. We'll find the right mix. So we'll keep working on this and bring something else to you in the future.
Thank you, Michael. Any other comments? All right, guys, let's go on to item 1.5, which is discussion of low impact development for stormwater. And I think Jonathan from city staff will be talking about this item.
Hi, everybody. Just do a quick sound check. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. While Jonathan's trying to put this up, I think I can verbalize a lot of this to get started. All right, so to start with, a while back, well, I wanted to give a quick overview on low impact development and the requirements from the state, and give a quick little summary of the permit, and then kind of dial in on the implications of this that it has on Herriman City and developers. So let me see here. Oh, good. John's up already. John, do I have control by chance? Doesn't appear I do.
You should be able to have controls now.
You should be good now.
Thank you, sir. All right, so the permit is essentially giving authorization from the state to municipalities and land use authorities to allow runoff to fall into waters of the state. And that's a pretty vague definition, right? So it can be a public stormwater system, it can be county facilities, it can be storm drain channels, it can be whatever. And anything that's kind of essentially falling off the site and into public stormwater system. So the state then says, okay, if you're going to do this, then there's some certain requirements you have to follow. And this again is it's a permit issued by the state DEQ, and there's a handful of these permits that they've issued within the state, and the one that we fall under is called the Jordan Valley Municipalities Permit, and it includes all land use authorities within Salt Lake County. And so, just dialing in just a little bit on some of these permit requirements. Jonathan, let me hit next slide for me here. Up here I've got. Okay. So in this permit, it says all co-permittees, which essentially is Herriman City and the land use authorities within this permit, require Herriman City to develop a stormwater management plan that has to include 6 minimum measures, and I've listed them right here. So they include public education and outreach, public involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, long-term stormwater management in new development and redevelopment, and pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. And so Herriman City, this permit has implications on obviously our SWIP and the work we're doing to implement this SWIP. And so Herriman City engaged with JUB to help us make sure that we're going to be in compliance with this permit. And so we are having weekly meetings with them to ensure we're there. And this presentation, next slide for me, Jonathan. And next slide, sorry, go ahead. And so the presentation here is to dial in on the long-term stormwater management on new developments and redevelopments. John, you can hit the next slide again. And so inside this permit, it requires all development projects and redevelopment projects to retain and manage runoff from the site such that all storm events, 80% essentially of all stormwater events that occur have to be retained on site by utilizing low impact development. Also, the co-permittee, again, at Herriman City, is required to implement at least five, and allow for use of 5 LID practices from the state's guide to low impact development. And I think what they're just trying to do is say, hey, land use authority, you have to let them use these particular infrastructure components to achieve this retention of all the 80th percentile rainfall. And so again, I want to focus on those top 2, but there is an exception to projects that for some reason, if it's not technically feasible for them to retain runoff, that they are exempt from this rule. But those, at least here in Herriman, they'll probably be far few and in between, pretty rare. And they're usually in cases where you might have a high water table. Herriman City is not known for having a high water table, or in areas of well protection zones. And we would need to take a closer look at that. Next slide, Jonathan. Thank you. So I want to dial in just a little bit and talk about the requirement for this retention of the 80th percentile rainfall. Again, the best way to describe this is you could think of, 80% of the time, there's going to be no runoff falling off of this new project site when it's done and completed because of these new infrastructure components that they put on to the project. And to give some sense of perspective, I've put in here, a 100-year event is 2.48 inches, just kind of somewhere in the middle of Herriman City. Now, this 80th percentile rainfall, 80% of the time, we're going to only see about a ½ inch at a time on each event. And so this requirement is seen as and is a water quality mitigation measure and not a flood control mitigation measure. You can see when we are requiring a developer to restrict their flow on a 100-year rainfall event, these components to retain the 80th percentile rainfall will not do the job. They will have to continue to restrict or detain that runoff. So again, in most cases, these components don't really help for detention. They will help for retention, and we can get into that if there are some questions with that. But for the most part, in addition to the flood control measures that currently exist within the standard, will not meet this requirement to retain the 80th percentile rainfall. And they'll have to do that in addition to. Next slide, Jonathan. Okay, so I wanted to dial in and talk just a little bit about these infrastructure components that Herriman City has to allow, at least 5 of these. And currently right now, the standard does not include these details. And earlier on this year, I believe it was February, where this was, or maybe it could have been March, I apologize, that these requirements were put out. Since that time, we've been implementing them and doing workshops to do so. This guide that exists was put out by the state, and it shows, so these implementations could include a rain garden, bioretention cell, bioswales, vegetated strips, a tree box filter, a green roof, pervious surfaces, infiltration basin, infiltration trench, a dry well, underground infiltration galleries, and harvest and reuse. Now, any of these can be used to achieve the 80th percentile. Now, the city is obligated to allow at least 5, right? So there may be some here where Herriman City elects to say, hey, we don't want to allow some of these in public infrastructure. And in our meetings and our workshops, we've elected to allow all of them at the developer's choice if they're private and privately maintained. But there are just maybe a select few that we wouldn't allow. Now, again, so the developer's use of these LIDs, they can be used currently. So as of July 1st, they are, and we'll talk about this just in a little bit, but as of July 1st, all development, new development or redevelopment is required to comply with this requirement. And so they are, at their discretion, able to use any of these that have been indicated in this appendix as was put out by the state. Jonathan, will you hit the next slide for me? Now, I thought it would be helpful to show an example. I know I rattled off pretty quickly all these examples of these best management practices, or BMPs, right? The vegetated strip or bioswale or infiltration gallery. So nearby, there's an example. This is not within Herriman City, but nearby there was a residential subdivision that implemented and essentially has complied with this requirement. And it shows, this is kind of an example of how this can work. In this middle picture, you can kind of see that the road is on the left, and there's a bioswale right in the center line of that picture, and you can see that the runoff from the roadway doesn't get caught by the curb. So the curb actually falls down, or is kind of level with the road, and then the runoff can fall into that swale, and it collects in there, and it can hold the runoff, and then it promotes infiltration to the ground as opposed to letting it run off to the downstream public system, then thereby holding 80%, that 80th percentile retention requirement. So that's a quick example of what it could look like. There's lots of other examples that it could look like, right? So there's commercial sites, residential sites, and there's multifamily. And so there's different ways to achieve this. This is just a simple residential subdivision example of how it could be implemented. Let's see if it works on my end. Jonathan, it still doesn't. Next slide, please. Alrighty. So again, this is the summary here. So again, all new development as of, again, July 1st, whether it's private or public, will be required to manage and hold the 80th percentile rainfall, on their project. And Herriman City, again, we're holding weekly meetings to implement these into the stormwater management plan. And we thought that, and even though the stormwater management plan and the standards have not reflected these updates yet, there are 3 projects since July 1st that have come through our development and review team, and we have required this requirement of them, specifically the 80th percentile retention and using these LIDs to make that work. And so we just wanted to apprise council. Blake had asked that I prepare this and make sure that council and planning commission are apprised of this, and happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions from City Council, Planning Commission?
I just have a comment. I'm just, I'm happy that we have options here with lid, because I just see a lot of developments with large grass areas that become useless. And I think this gives them a lot more options to be creative with managing their water than what we've done in the past.
Thank you, Brody. All right, DW.
Sorry,
Mayor Watts.
this is Mayor Watts. Hey, Jonathan, are there any of those that we would specifically want to not include for some reason?
Yeah, so an infiltration gallery was flagged as one that may not be used solely, and so it has some conditions. It's not that we would restrict it completely. And John, would you mind going back to a few slides where I had the bullet list of all those points? Right now, retention basins or detention basins are utilized currently and could be classified as by strictly looking at the definition of it as an infiltration gallery or an infiltration trench. And we want to say, yeah, that's okay, you can use that, but we would want to see other areas, or excuse me, other BMPs used upstream of this instead of just deepening a detention basin to have just a retention basin below the outfall, if that makes sense. So there's some conditions.
And obviously,
maybe back up one, Jonathan. Sorry, go ahead. There you go.
I'm just obviously, as a city council, we've been working to get rid of some of these basins that we have throughout the city that were never intended to be permanent. And I would hate for us to set something up that allows permanent ponds that aren't beautified and intended to be, we don't want muddy swamps all over the place because we've allowed them to do this. So as we work through that, I just want to make sure we keep those things in mind.
Yeah, it's a good point, and maybe just I can point out a couple other that have been flagged by our public works team as well as the engineering group. So the pervious surfaces, if they're used for a public roadway, we wouldn't elect to do that, right? If there's we're okay with pervious surfaces being utilized, but to snow plow on them and to run maintenance on them. Right now, we're not comfortable with moving forward. Now, again, a private developer may utilize that, and we wouldn't restrict them from utilizing it. But as far as a public surface for a roadway, a local collector, arterial, we obviously wouldn't. That's not something that we would elect to allow at this point. Similarly, we don't have the intent currently to harvest and reuse or maintain anything that harvests and reuse currently. We're looking into that. But again, that's probably something that would be utilized by a private entity. I think that probably covers it. There's a lot of positive review on the tree box filters. I think that it's going to change. There are a handful of these that when they become public, that it'll change how maintenance happens within the city. So we're going to have to learn how to maintain a tree box filter, how to maintain our bioswales and whatnot. So anyway, it was a good question and a good point.
As we go through this, just so that the council and the planning commission can be educated, and I don't think this necessarily needs to be something that's done in a meeting per se, but can we put something together that maybe educates us a little bit more on what all of these things are and gives us examples of what we should be looking for, so that as we're, for example, putting together a master development agreement or development guidelines, that we can be looking for these things and know what they are.
Certainly. Yeah, I think that's one of the easier ways to do that. There's that manual, I can provide that. And there's some education points that I can provide. And again, just summarizing last point on that slide there, the intention of this presentation is, this is going to be new. This is a new requirement as of July 1st for developers. Some will be used to it and they're ready for it, since it's kind of been talked about for a while with in legislation and Home Builders Association. It's kind of been going back and forth, so a lot of them already know, but some developers don't know, and it's going to, I don't know if I'd say fair to call it a hardship, but it's something that's going to be different and may not necessarily, depending on how they do it, cost more, but in some cases, depending on the situation, it may. So anyway, again, if you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, guys, let's move on to item 1.6, which is a discussion of the Mountain Point Retail Center. And it looks like we'll turn to city staff. Heather, on this item.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So in similar conversations we just had about the Rockwell Landing M1 zone, we have had the developer of Mountain Point Retail approach the city interested in doing some flex space. Right now, as you can see here, it is zone C2. So we have Kim Reynolds-Bacher, who's the developer, one of his partners, Rhett Wadsworth, here with us as well to answer questions. So this just shows the area, just to familiarize where Mountain Point Retail is. And let's see what we have next here. Do I have controls, Jonathan?
Yes, but this is a single slide. We'll have to go to the other
Okay.
file to
You
pull
can
up the
just
concept.
leave. No. Yeah, if you can pull up the next one for me, that'd be great. Thank you. And this is just the concept plan for Mountain Point Retail. So right now we have the Holiday Oil here, Redemption Bar and Grill that recently opened on the east side of Academy Parkway. And the developer is interested in doing more of a flex space on the west side of Academy. And that is all I really had. Chris, if you want to turn it over to Kim to speak on that item.
Sure. Kim, if you're available and want to share some additional insight into this.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be able to say a few words tonight. Thanks for letting us have this opportunity. We've been dabbling in and on and off with land development in Herriman for probably the last decade and a half. And honestly, we've developed all the way through the Utah County, Davis, Weber County, Salt Lake, and Herriman City staff has been the absolute best we've ever worked with. And so we just want to commend you for hiring good people up there. And I'm not trying to score any points. I'm just letting you know that's how we feel. They're great people to work with. They're good problem solvers and try to help things move along. As was mentioned, this property, we donated the right-of-way, the Academy Parkway right-of-way, a portion of that to the city. And, you know, the commercial zone, thought it might be a good thing to do, but we've had several developers that's looked at this with us. One of them is Wadsworth Development, a very seasoned and sophisticated retail developer. St. John's Properties also had this property tied up for some time with us, and we're going to move ahead. The problem we've had the consistent feedback on this property. In fact, I've got Rhett Wadsworth here with us tonight. Rhett, you want to just, Rhett, you looked at this property for about 3-4 months during your due diligence and you kind of walked away from it. You want to just share with them quickly what your concerns with this property was as far as retail, commercial?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. We can.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, so we took a good hard look at this thing. We had it under contract for a number of months, almost closed on it. In fact, we were maybe a day or two out from closing. And what we determined was, given the location in comparison to Academy, the Academy Park or development that Deloy Hansen's doing there off of what will be the main on and off ramp from Mountain View corridor, was really outpositioning us with their 47-acre potential development or planned development. They've got a much more, I guess, it's just a better located because they have so much synergy with the Slick and U of U Tech campus going in there. They've got an additional, 32 acres on the northeast corner of that same intersection slated for commercial. They got a tracks line that's planned or hoped for. The Mountain Ridge High School is closer to that. With all of those, and in comparison to our site, which, eventually will not have an on and off ramp from Mountain View Highway long term, didn't make sense for retail. In addition to, if you look at the map in a little bigger picture, you've got a regional center, the Mountain View Village. You've got a wonderful commercial retail centric corridor on 134th, all the way from Herriman Crossroads, the Smiths, east to the Bangor Highway exit, where there's Riverton Depot and Rose Creek Crossing with some other kind of regional players like Walmart and Home Depot. So that kind of canceled retail out for us. Once we saw what they were planning there, we just don't see the demand being met, or the demand will be met with what is already there and maybe a little bit more commercial with what Deloy's doing. And then as far as office goes, we reached out to a bunch of brokers for office as well as retail. And the office feedback we got was, dude, there's not going to be any demand or need out here for a really long time, given what's still available over by I-15 and the Bangor Parkway crossing and Silicon Slopes. And then in addition to that, with all this COVID nonsense, just knocking things back, there's a million square feet just in Silicon Slopes alone up for sublease. So that just puts us back another few years for any office need. And so we came up with the idea of what Kim's going to present here.
So the flex space idea, as was mentioned tonight earlier on Rockwell Landing, that's been a great little project for us. It's in the M1 zone. And as was mentioned there, we've got a dance studio that wants to come in, and we already got 2 gymnastic companies over there. We got the DBAT. We've got more service and instructional related companies over there than we have, and that would be in your traditional M1 zone located over there. We just felt like this location would be great, at least the west half of this property, because this conceptual plan shows a big box user. And I've had 4 different commercial real estate agencies trying to help find us some tenants that we can land here, and we can't attract the big box user at this site. As Rhett mentioned, the site that Wasatch property has further west, where the future off-ramp will go, is a much more conducive site for a retail store like that. So, and you can only put so many strip centers in. And the product that we've been building over there at Rockwell, our biggest footprint's 30,000 square feet, but we divide it up into 5 different spaces. So we have 6,000 square foot segments. And it's a smaller M1 type use. It's not the 100,000 square foot users you get along the freeway corridor, but they would do very well over in this location as well, because they provide service to the community. They'd be convenient for a lot of the residents there to be able to walk to. We're also finding a lot of demand for online businesses that only want 3,000 or 4,000 square feet with an office and a restroom and a little showroom. We see that kind of being the retail future as more people go to online shopping. And we're starting to accommodate a lot more of those tenants in other different business park areas that we have under construction. And so we think our product is a nice enough look that it would fit in here, and it sits up out of the ground away, so that this property kind of sits in a little bit of a hole. The elevation is kind of low, and we could still have it high enough to create some exposure for the tenant base that would be there. And so we would propose changing, or at least doing an M1 overlay or an M2 overlay. There's been talk about creating another zone, and maybe that's what we do here, that we could put some of this flex space over here, which still has a retail component. It still has a sales tax component that's associated with it. It still creates jobs, and it creates a benefit to the community. The problem with a traditional retail center, as this location, the feedback we've constantly got is that this is actually kind of a C minus D plus location compared to the one just further west. We don't want to compete with Deloy Hansen down there, because we simply can't. He's got the better deal down there. But we think we ought to have more of a symbiotic, harmonious relationship with them. So we're not trying to steal their tenant, they're not trying to steal ours. The Better Cities study that the city had done a while back, even talks about having a more diversity of product. That they even mentioned there is a little bit too much retail pegged for the city with this far south. And so we took all that into consideration. We've taken a lot of other people's opinion on this that understand retail commercial, and we just don't want to be mowing weeds or spraying weeds out there for the next 20 years. The property tax is fairly expensive. We'd like to turn this into an income producing location, a destination location for certain businesses, so that it will generate revenue, so that we can pay the property taxes and provide some service to the communities and create jobs. So that's kind of our goal there. We think it makes sense. It's got great location as far as exposure, but not for retail. It's an A plus location for flex space, a C minus D plus for traditional retail. We just don't think it's going to work. So any consideration you could give on that would be helpful for us. The staff has been excellent at trying to help give us ideas on what we can do. We just think the flex space makes a lot more sense over here, and still keep the east side more of the the neighborhood commercial that we've started down there already. And then that would be kind of somewhat of a compromise. We just don't think we're going to ever attract a big box user on this site, which is really needed to create synergy on this site. So the strip centers would really struggle here without a big box user. And I'm open for questions. So thanks for letting me take a minute.
Thank you. Any discussion items or questions for the developer on this item from Planning Commission or City Council? All right. And I'm not very good with initials, remembering whose initials are for whom.
This is
Chris, this is
Brody.
Adam. I'd like to hear what council has to say. I know what my thoughts are on commercial, and I can understand too much is sometimes a bad thing, but I want to hear what council has to say.
And I think that a little more specific, Clint, is the question of, are we preserving this for the commercial zone, or are we looking at it to switch it into other zones? And so, Clint, I think you may be addressing this question.
No, I think Adam asks, really a fair question. But to his point too, I'd like to hear, how members of the Planning Commission feel as well. Obviously, we've had a lot of discussion over the past several years about, preserving what we think is the appropriate and right commercial space for future development. I think we all recognize that the dynamics of retail spaces was changing prior to COVID, and I think that has accelerated that potential change and what that looks like in the future moving forward. I think the feedback that we've heard in terms of trying to find some type of a big box anchor for this area, it's my personal belief that those big box anchors are going to become fewer and fewer moving forward. And so I think it's challenging when you talk about changing, obviously, from commercial to a different type of zone. But I think part of that discussion needs to be, what is going to be marketable, what is going to still provide some revenue for the city, and what is going to meet the needs of the city moving forward. So I think many of you have heard, that there's certain areas that I have certainly fought to preserve, and others that I have been vocal that, excuse me, we're probably not the ideal space to try and preserve. Certainly, this has some access and visibility from Mountain View corridor, knowing what the future really development of Mountain View and how those on and off ramps work and things certainly will affect this space, as has been talked about a little bit tonight. But the one thing that I have noticed in my own travels, my own observations, is again really that development of this really flex type space, and the fact that we are seeing a lot of these smaller online retailers that are looking for those space that really want this, smaller warehouse spaces and office spaces to be able to run everything out of there. And again, as we've talked about tonight, I've seen a lot of uses in terms of the personal instruction, all avenues of that. So I think it's a unique idea. I think we've seen the success out there in this area of that type of space. But again, it's a delicate balance, and it's one that we have to be very methodical and judicious about as we go through contemplating, a change from commercial to a different type of zone and how that meets the needs of the city moving forward. But again, it's something that personally I'm willing to at least look at in the realm of the total needs of the city moving forward.
Thank you, Clint. Brody?
Yeah, I align with Clint, and I feel like, the developer is really looking at the property as what what it can become, its highest and best use. I think it's, not a great idea when we're going to say a property needs to be a specific zone. I think the flex space makes sense with where it's positioned along Mountain View corridor. And I think the developer's done the needed research to say, what is the highest best use for this property? Here's what it is. And I think long-term that this is the right move for this piece of property.
All right, Mayor, did you have some remarks?
Yeah, on this one, as far as the principle of having flex space in this area, I don't have any problem with it. I do have concerns anytime we're looking at,
moving something out of a tax generating zone. And so as we are looking at this, I think I would reiterate my statement of earlier is I think I'd prefer to have a different zone in this for this type of situation that will allow us to better control where we want these locations, more so than maybe adjusting the current zone. I would like to see, how can we, and I'd like to see maybe some numbers from staff about what kind of revenue generation this has provided to the city on the other flex zone, the other flex spaces that we've had throughout the city. I'm concerned. We've had lots of we've had lots of back and forth among the council about preserving commercial, making sure that we preserve it, making sure that we're generating tax base, and anytime that we are changing a zone that moves away from the higher generating revenues, that gives me concern. Not saying that it's not appropriate in this particular case, but I'd like to see before we really started getting into high end, let's make a bunch of changes to our commercial. I'd like to see kind of where that ends up, and so that we can make a good decision on how much of that we want in our city and where we want it. Do I have a problem with the flex space? No, I don't. I would just like to maybe have this as a maybe an overall process as we're going through of, okay, I think we're okay with it. Let's either figure out how to put it into certain zones that we do have, or let's create a zone that lets us, kind of have a little bit more control over where we go. Because I don't want to start, it's the same reason that we've had discussions about our auto zone and being careful about slicing off chunks of that for other things, is because we want to make sure that we're preserving it. So that's my biggest concern, is just, once we start getting into this, if we're opening the doors to it, let's just really control where we're putting it and how much of it we're including in our city. So that's maybe where I would ask staff to bring us back some numbers, some information, and continue to look into our previous request of changing that zoning.
Thank you. Councilman Henderson?
I'll just say real quick, I'm always willing to consider anything, but I will say in regards to this, my bias is always towards the long term, what's better in the long run. This is one of only a couple of spots we have that will front a freeway. And you can ask any city that has freeway frontage where they didn't preserve it and they regret it. So willing to consider anything. And I understand the property owner's desire to move it now versus later. But had we done that with the corner, say on 5600 across from Smith's, we wouldn't have any of that commercial there now.
All right. Thank you, Jared. M&M, I don't remember who that is.
Yeah.
Oh, Michael.
Yes. Yeah, so basically, we're looking at three options. One is broadening the existing C2 zone to add uses that would be conducive for flex space development. Another is to rezone the property M1. A third is to look at creating a new zone altogether. So we'll have to research that. Honestly, I don't have a strong recommendation which direction would likely work best. And it sounds like the council's asking that we do a little more studying and see if we can come up with some numbers that might help inform that decision. But those are basically, like I said, the three options that we're looking at to try and accommodate this request.
And Michael, a question maybe that you can state here as well from me is, what are the difference with the design standards between the commercial and the M1 zone, for instance? Because I know when I'm flipping through and looking at some of what the images are that were provided, I look at those and I mean, a warehouse definitely looks very different than the design standards we have required in our commercial zones. And some of what I worry about is if we do allow this, the integrity of the structures that go in with the surrounding commercial that's located up there.
Right. I think the M1 zone alone probably would not emit the type of more dynamic flex space, some of the nicer images that we're seeing. At least it wouldn't be required in the zone itself. It might be something that a developer may bring to the table, like Kim. So that's a good point. The C2 zone obviously has some additional architectural controls and requirements, mason requirements. So yeah, that's something we also should be thinking about as well.
And then also, just because we talked about some of the allowances in the M1 zone, potentially that are not really conducive to certain areas, I guess we would obviously have to consider that as well, bringing it into this area if that's something we want or don't want. And so, and Mayor, did you have another remark?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with something on Michael. When we're looking at possibly adjusting our zone requirements for maybe a C2, if we choose to go that route, I would prefer if there was because of the intent of a C2 zone, I would prefer if there was a limit on the percentage of flex space that can be in that, for a particularly zoned area. For example, only 20%, for example, could be considered flex space, while the rest of it needs to be, more of a retail based. So if we're going to do something along those lines, I would like to see the recommendations staff, as you're making recommendations, I'd like to see staff recommendations on what they feel that balance should be in a C2 zone, because what I don't want to have happen is, have everywhere we have C2, suddenly all become flex space when that was never our intent. So that's
right.
As you're looking at that particular option, if you would consider that and make a recommendation, I'd appreciate it.
Great.
All right. Any other comments? Brody?
I just have a question. Is the flex space, because I know flex space has, I don't know, it seems like the variety of things that have moved into flex space is a lot different than what it used to be as far as like manufacturing goes. Kind of along with what the mayor said, I do kind of feel like we need a different zone almost for this type of product where it is flexible as far as what's allowed. Because I mean, manufacturing is broad, and what the building type looks like is varies a lot too. Because almost flex space is like a tilt up kind of product, but I've seen commercial buildings be tilt up masonry. And just what are your thoughts, Michael?
You're right. What does flex space really mean? How does that fit into the city's vision? This might be a location where we could consider a newer zoning tool that's called form-based code, where the ordinance really focuses on spatial relationships and the design of buildings, but allows a lot of flexibility as to how the buildings are actually used. The way that they're laid out and designed, it would allow for changes over time to respond to what is the highest and best use of the property. But at the same time, we're still trying to achieve a place that is a little more community focused, a little more dynamic, not just simply tilt up structures. Form-based code is certainly growing across the country. And a lot of times cities will start with like an individual project like this. That might be a possible solution. Obviously when we're talking about flex space, that's kind of part of that objective, is creating a space where multiple types of uses could be successful. And as the market changes over time, we're not looking at just building a building that ends up sitting there because it can't adjust to the market. So it will be adaptable and something that can be more permanent in our community. So that might be another option we could look at.
Thank you, Michael. All right, guys, I appreciate it. So if there's no other comments on item 1.6, we'll move on to item 1.7, which is the discussion pertaining to flag lots. And it looks like, Michael, you're going to be sharing that item. You're muted.
I too quickly followed your instructions, Chris, as far as muting.
I know,
myself.
you were quick. You were quick.
So a lot of presentations coming up. Staff continues to receive inquiries and requests from the general public, from property owners, from developers for flag lots. And in fact, the new Valhalla subdivision that at least most of the city council members are aware of, that's coming to the planning commission probably within the next month or two. It actually includes a flag lot for an existing property. But technically, according to our existing ordinance, that proposed flag lot should not be allowed, and I'll explain why. So we continue to receive requests for flag lots. I took a quick poll of our surrounding communities. South Jordan has a pretty specific flag lot ordinance, not very much unlike our own. They have a number of very specific standards, dimensional requirements. So they do allow flag lots. Look at Bluffdale City Code. They do not specifically regulate what they call a flag lot, but they will allow up to 2 lots to be accessed by a shared private driveway. So really that would constitute what a flag lot is to us in Herriman. So they do allow something, and then Riverton allows the same thing. They do allow flag lots. You can have up to 2 homes serviced by a single common pole or stem for the flag lot. So our neighbors do allow them, but still very limited. Now, it's my understanding that Herriman City allowed flag lots a little broader than we do now. When we adopted our current city code in 2017, we imposed greater restrictions on flag lots. And we're just going to quickly walk through what those standards are, and then we're going to look at some examples. So here's our definition of a flag lot. You know, typically they're called flag lots because when you look at them in plan form, the lot where the home actually sits is the flag, and then there's usually like a pole or a stem which provides the road to the public right of way to the street, and that pole or stem is typically 20 to 25 feet wide. Let's see. Next, there we go. Sorry, I went too far. So these are a number of the standards in our existing code. The flag lot has to be contiguous to a dedicated local public street. It cannot front on a collector or arterial street. That has been one of the biggest challenges or obstacles or standards that has prevented flag lots. And that was intentional. That was part of our 2017 amended ordinance to limit where flag lots could go. So they can only be on local roads right now, but not on a collector or arterial. Now, collectors are defined in our transportation plan as both minor and major. And if the council and the planning commission is interested in exploring revisiting these flag lot standards, that may be one area that we could look at is, does it make sense to prohibit flag lots on both a minor and a major collector route? Again, we talked about the width of the staff portion has a standard 20 to 25 feet. There's a maximum length, and that's primarily driven by the fire department as far as access for emergency response services. It has to be hard serviced. And here's another, and this is the standard that is catching potentially the Valhalla subdivision. A flag lot should not be created as part of a subdivision where there are more than 2 lots in the subdivision or from an illegally divided lot or parcel. So the Valhalla subdivision case, they're proposing, I think it's 35 lots, and one of them is a flag lot. Again, it's for an existing home, but it is a new shape of that lot, which technically is a flag lot. So technically, that should not be allowed under that strict reading of that standard. Flag lot shall not gain access via an easement. So we're wanting to make sure that whoever owns that flag lot controls their own essentially driveway, that they have ownership and control. So we're not having potential conflicts between neighbors or property owners. No building or construction except for driveways shall be allowed on the staff portion of the flag lot. That seems pretty obvious, but we did have somebody who was trying to look at maybe having a flag lot at the street that was 20 or 25 feet wide, and then it might widen as it goes back to the property. And they were talking about maybe putting an accessory structure in that area. And so anyways, we have had some people trying to do something with that that's against the ordinance. The number 8 is just talking about what is determined to be the front of the port of the lot. Next slide. The flag lot shall be at least 1/2 acre. You can imagine that does have some limitations. Only one single family dwelling on the flag lot. So this is not for duplexes or for multiple single family dwellings. Again, we only allow one. We want to show the approved building envelope on the flag lot. Obviously, one of the challenges with doing flag lot development is it's introducing a home in a place where the neighboring property owners probably did not reasonably anticipate that there would be development. This is obviously a large, deep lot, probably used historically for agricultural purposes. And now potentially the property owner with city review is introducing a new home, perhaps mid-block. And so a lot of times cities will do things like this where they're wanting to make sure it's really clear to everyone involved, especially the neighbors, you know, where is this new home going to go? And we want to make sure we're showing that very clearly on the subdivision proposal. We have a regulation for 6-foot solid vinyl fence around all sides of the flag lot. That has also come an issue sometimes where people have said, well, that aesthetically, maybe that doesn't work the best. I want to do something different, or maybe not even having all fencing around all sides, but that is the ordinance. And then we do require public right-of-way improvements for both lots being affected by the subdivision. Okay, so I think that's the main points of those standards. So here are some examples of issues. Again, remember that we had a different ordinance, and there were probably some flag lots that existed in the city before our incorporation. So we certainly do have some non-conforming flag lots in the city. So this particular flag lot is about a large 1/3 acre. As we said, the current ordinance requires a 1/2 acre. And it also requires that all street improvements be made to both of the lots. So this property does not technically comply with that current ordinance. Here's another one that is showing essentially 3 lots that are being accessed from the single pole or stem to the flag lot. And it has, you know, and again, we don't allow that to be done by easement. But in this case, that seems to be part of this solution. Here's another one where we have a flag lot on a collector street. So Pioneer Street is a collector. I think it's classified as a minor collector. Engineering can correct me if that's wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's a minor collector. And then again, we do currently require the 6-foot solid vinyl fence. And I don't believe this property has that. Some images of flag lots that have been developed in the city. And here you can see again that paved road. It's about the right width. And then we do have the vinyl fencing on the property. Another flag lot on a minor collector, 7300 West. So again, that's an existing condition. Photograph of that approach, that flag lot approach. I'm assuming with those posts that were, the fence is coming as required by the ordinance.
It's actually already up.
Oh, it's already up.
It's there.
Right. And then here, and this is a classic issue, and I'm pretty confident that almost every city along the Salt Lake, in the Salt Lake Valley, is dealing with flag lots. We're not unique. Even Salt Lake City, as urbanized as they are, dealt with flag lot issues. A lot of older lots are very deep, and a lot of folks over time just stop using them for agricultural purposes and have interest in doing flag lot development because it's difficult to do, to cobble together properties and put together a larger subdivision proposal. So this is an area potentially where we could see flag lots if the city were to change maybe some of its standards. So the question is it time to revisit our flag lot ordinance? Have we liked how it's been working over the last few years? Has it perhaps impacted more property owners negatively than we had anticipated? Is it too narrow? Is it working just right? I will just say we continue to receive requests for flag lots, and oftentimes the requests just don't fit the standards. I would say we're turning far more people away than actually can go through the process and actually meet the standards.
All right, Michael.
Probably 10 to 1. I'm just putting a number out there, but it's far more people we say no to on these right now.
All right, Adam, do you have some remarks?
Yes. So it's kind of ironic. A lot of the stuff that Michael actually showed were a lot of the original items before we ever had an ordinance. And so I personally think we should keep the ordinance and keep with the no flag lots because we have continued to have problems in trying to address it. I think we've spent a long time, I know I have personally in the last 6 years of being on the planning commission, focusing on why flag lots should not be in our community. And I think we will, if we open that up, we would, more so than we have, I think we'll amplify and not get the community we really want.
And at least from my perspective, Michael and City Council, I think, and it was a great example, the last slide you had, Michael, because I think as a city, part of our responsibility is to maintain the integrity of a neighborhood. And I look at those, and that is what that neighborhood is. When you start allowing flag lots to go in, there's one here, and then it really changes the dynamics of the neighborhood overall, and to some degree causes individuals to choose to leave because their neighborhood no longer is what they thought it was. Now, yes, flag lots have been a pain since I've been here, and it's gotten a little bit better, but I know there's some that fall in a flag lot category that I'm not even sure if they do. For instance, when there's a non-city owned road that may have 4 or 5 different homes on it already, and it really will be a flag lot or nothing. There's some weird outliers that I'm not sure how to handle very well, and I don't think we have anything that answers that very well. But overall, from the time I've been here, the flag lot requirements have definitely improved what we've seen. Not saying there still isn't problems and maybe needs to be addressed or considered, but that's sort of how I look at it. Adam?
I was just, when you were talking, it made me think of one other thing I meant to say is I honestly would rather look into I mean, we have many subdivisions that come in and we do private driveways for multiple homes. I would rather maybe look into the potential of allowing some areas to have multi accesses off one driveway, more so than addressing the true flag lot challenge. I know which one we're talking about, where it's kind of an existing flag lot out kind of by Lafayette that was done before, and they're trying to subdivide the front lot, and that's where the challenge we're having. And so I think we should probably talk about more of that personally than regressing on our work that we've done to get us to where we're at with the flag lot.
All right, thank you, Adam. And I saw Brody and Sherry, but I'm going to give it to Sherry, Brody.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Thanks. I just, obviously, I have issues with the flag lots because it impacts me personally. So without weighing too much on a personal level here, I can tell you that because I'm on 7300 West, my driveway accesses it. I couldn't put another home on my lot, and that's 2.5 acres. And to me, that's unreasonable to say on 2.5 acres, you can't put 2 homes. But this would prohibit that because I would, my driveway exits out onto 7300. And I'm not the only person on my street. I have neighbors that have been here for a long time that have larger lots, but this prohibits them from doing that. And I agree 100% with not changing the integrity of the neighborhood, but I literally have 10,000 square foot lots surrounding me, right? I'm in a bowl of that surrounding me. So it's not that I wouldn't change the integrity of the neighborhood. I'm the only person in the whole neighborhood that has animals. And so, that was frustrating to me when this ordinance got changed, because previous to that, when we purchased our place, the intent was always to have the ability to put another home back here if one of my kids wanted to build back here or something like that. Never put more than one, because the idea was always keep an acre lot. But this prohibits that from even happening. And I just think it's overreach. I think that there has to be a provision in here that we can look at certain things and say, yeah, but this makes sense. This doesn't allow a path forward for anybody who you go, yeah, but it makes sense that we change the use in that, or that we allow those types of things. I just think there has to be some sort of language that enables us to look at, and I don't want it to be a mess so that everyone has to be a special exception. I don't know what the solution is, but I do believe that I know for sure I'm not the only person, because my neighbors just up the street, they were trying to figure it out too. And they're like, but we can't keep our home and put another house on here because the flag lot rule. So I just think that, and they also have, they have about 2 acres also. So I just think that it's, in fairness to those kind of situations, there should be some sort of provision in here that you can work through an appeal process on this or something.
All right, thank you. Brody?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Sherry, because, we take the larger pieces of property and we subdivide them, and she's in a position where everything around her has been subdivided into smaller pieces, and she sits on a large piece of property, which I think is different than us looking at 1 acre lots that are throughout the whole subdivision, and it's all the same, and then we're looking to split into half acres or quarter acres. I think that changes it, but yeah, I kind of agree with Sherry. To her point, there's like a variance or something that we could put as a condition to review these situations where it does make sense, because like she said, she's the only property around her that's bigger than a half acre.
Jared? And I see you also, Lauren. I'll go to you next.
I have to say that I agree with Chris and Adam in principle that, it's accomplished a lot of what we want it to, but there's never a one size fits all. So I agree with Sherry and others that, that there are outliers and things that should be an exception. Maybe that's, Michael, you might remind me if there's an exception built into the ordinance, right? If there's extenuating circumstances or a way for the governing body to grant exceptions.
Right now, there is not. There's not an exception. If we were to provide an exception, we should create a list of standards to review the exception against, to try and remove the concern of being arbitrary and capricious in making those decisions. So that might be a possibility.
I totally agree. And at the same time, that left my mouth and thinking, I always say how I hate exceptions because everyone thinks they have an exception, right? But there's never a one size fits all either. So I think Adam and Chris are right. We need to continue, and Sherry and others, we need to continue to work on it. And we definitely have some interesting pockets in our city.
And Jared, I mean, some thoughts on that is making exceptions that maintain the integrity of the area is the trick. Because you can see that one area that had all 1 acre lots, if every single one of them started deciding, oh, I'm zoned to where I can put a half acre behind me and this, it changes the feel of the entire street. So if they wanted to maintain the integrity and they did it once or twice, it's gone. It really is. And so it's just there. And we noticed it. And I bring up this one because someone came in wanting to do it, and every one of the neighborhoods were there to complain about it. And so that's just an example. It wasn't like there was one neighbor that said, I don't like this. It was like all of the neighbors were there saying, I don't want this. And so it's because they had the feel that our neighborhood is this already. And so that's where it gets a little bit tricky in some of the areas, and to be able to build something that has an exception but still maintain some sort of integrity, I think is the trick.
I completely agree. And anybody that listens to me at council meetings talk about maintaining that integrity is laughing as you describe that, because that's what I say all the time.
I wish it were, because my head keeps nodding yes to all what you just said too. It's like, yeah, we just have to just somehow make a provision that addresses that, to say, yeah, but this makes sense to make. And I agree, Jared, I hate to even say exception on there, but if we can set some standards there that would say, if you meet these standards and criteria, then we can take a look at it or something, so that we don't just have a flood of people with thinking they meet exceptions. But yeah, I agree with integrity.
But isn't that already what we have in the standard? Like, isn't that, you know, the standard itself doesn't completely prevent, if I'm reading it, understanding it correctly, Michael, it allows flag lots in certain situations. So for
the
me,
only exception
I'm very
to
much
that,
I don't want to change it. If we're going to change it, we just simply need to update the ordinance to make it clear and when we allow it. But other than that, I don't see any reason to make any sort of a way for an exception when, you know, right now, you know, that the whole point of the ordinance is to restrict it. And so you know, if we need to adjust that ordinance appropriately because there might be a situation that we haven't considered, great, let's adjust the ordinance. But, you know, I would much rather, you know, basically leave it in place and make a change to make it clear that this wasn't intended, as opposed to going and starting to try to figure out what exceptions are appropriate and what are not, or doing anything like that. I just say, let's update the ordinance. But in my own opinion, I'm pretty happy with the ordinance the way it is. And if there is a situation where, example, we have multiple acres that are being, you know, that are being restricted from development because of whatever reason, but let's find the right solution. And, you know, maybe what that solution is that there needs to be a road put in place as opposed to trying to make a flag lot. So those are, you know, that's my opinion. But I have a hard time, you know, with going anywhere near, you know, even calling it an exception. If we're going to do something, let's just change the ordinance and get it to where it needs to be.
and Michael, maybe you could remind me, but there is pretty much within this ordinance that there are certain streets that flag lots are just not allowed on, correct?
Again, that's what we said, no collectors, no arterials.
Correct. So there are some roads where there is no possibility for a landowner to do a flag lot. Lauren, if you still have a comment, I know you flashed in and out. I'll let you have a chance. And then I see Clint and then Adam again.
Well, I was just going to say, I look at, you know, I talk a lot about this SB 34 that passed last year. I know flag lots aren't specifically mentioned in there, but I can see down the road where that could be a requirement that we could meet pretty easily to meet SB 34 requirements. I'm guessing that number of requirements we have to meet as a city is going to go up in the future to meet the affordable housing issue. I would much rather see some flag lots brought in than some of this other, I mean, I think that fits more in the future and some infill development that we could do. And then I also think we talk a lot about on the commission about needing that size of lots. There's not a lot of left still in the city, and that's one way we can, I think, find some of those lots. Not a lot of those size of lots, but that's one way we can create some of those lots. Of course, flag lots do scare me a little bit, but I don't even like the alleys that we have, like over here in Anthem, where you've got the little miniature street that you can't fit 2 cars down, and it goes down to 10 or 12 townhomes. To me, that is, if you ask me, those are all flag lots to me, because there's only 1 car getting down there. I don't see any difference in allowing some flag lots, in the right place, of course, like we're talking, but I don't see there's any difference there between those.
Clint?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a lot really said that covers my views, and so I just wanted to kind of second what's been said, and that is, I agree with what you said, Chris, with this map that's in front of us. There's areas where maintaining the integrity is an expectation I think that those people should have and that the city should adhere to. But to Jared's point as well, there's not a one size fits all for everybody. And so I think that's the challenge. Like Michael said, this is not a challenge that's unique to us. It takes place in really every city, regardless of their current status of development there. There's always those that want to be able to subdivide and do things. So this is not unique to us. I think the challenge obviously is finding that right balance, because there is not a one size fits all. Certainly in Sherry's situation, where everything's been subdivided around her, to look at putting a flag lot potentially to allow her for future development, on her large parcel there, is not going to compromise the surrounding development, because the surrounding development has already compromised her, what she lived in and has been on for a long time out there. It's almost as if we need some type of and I don't like the word exception either, that has been mentioned. It's almost as if, there was some type of a conditional use type process that laid out those stipulations that had to be met, something along those lines, in order to have those actually truly considered, to move forward in a review process. But again, it's a challenge, there's no doubt, and sometimes it's hard to find that fine balance, and the only true solution that there is to it is to go back and say we're not going to allow them. I don't think that we've done enough homework to know if that is the true solution or not, but I certainly support looking at more options that are out there for us to be able to consider, again, to give some of those options that really should exist for some of our landowners in the city.
All right. Adam?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've talked about it before, but I almost wonder, I kind of agree that it makes sense to have an occasional exception for people that have never developed. But I've talked about this before, that we need to have something tied to that if you've developed your land, and maybe, I don't know in Sherry's case, but I'm talking about this area an example. Most of those areas were subdivided with a 2-lot subdivision originally, or a single lot subdivision to build their lot. And I was wondering, I know I've talked about it with Michael before and a lot of the planning commission, but I wonder if we tied it to, if subdivided already, then sorry, no flag lot. But if you haven't, then I totally understand that you weren't in that makeup, you didn't have that opportunity. And so I wonder if that might be more of the lack of a better word, exception, is you didn't have that opportunity. But if you're in an area where you have subdivided, because I'm actually looking down, ignore where the red box is and look down on the red where it says Triple Crown Lane as it heads into where Rose Creek is. Rose Creek is a master planned PUD approved in the county, and there's a lot of 1 acre and ½ acre lots that could comply if you allow the flag lot. And what that would do is it would start to change the ordinance, change the zone, but that PUD's over, so there's no density there anymore. So it could get tighter than what it originally was. And that's what I'm trying to say we need to protect, is the community feel which I would agree would make sure that Sherry's situation would be okay, but in other areas it wouldn't.
I don't want to just, sorry, I know I use myself as an example, but only because I am one of a few along my street. There's several other property owners that are in the same kind of situation that I'm in, just, just larger, that are in kind of a mess with this. But I just go back to what you said before, is this the integrity of the area. I completely agree with that.
All right. And I do note that with the current map in front of us, you sort of notice across the street there's two neighborhoods. That means one car each can come out of those neighborhoods at a time. When you look at the ones that are in red, it could potentially add another 9 cars on top of it. So, and I think part of the ordinance originally being changed was to limit some of these roads seeing as much traffic going on, turning right or turning left out of the driveways when they're busier roads as well. So I do remember some of the intentions of when they changed this flag lot ordinance, but I do understand that not everybody fits into that same box and with what we'd like to have accomplished with it. So, are there any other remarks on this item? And I guess the bigger question is this something that the Planning Commission or City Council feels strongly needs to be reevaluated in looking at a way to make, and I'm not going to say an exception, a condition that allows for flag lots in certain areas, or do we feel strongly that at this time the ordinance with how it stands is providing what we need? It looks like Brody has a comment, and then I would like to hear from Michael on that item as well, because he probably gets more phone calls than we do on this type of stuff. Did you have a remark, Brody?
I think we should make a conditional or variance.
So you're breaking up a little bit, but I'm getting that you feel like it probably needs to be looked at with potential ability to have a variance on.
Sorry,
on
my
this.
audio's.
That's okay. We'll blame it on COVID.
So Chris, you're right. We're just looking for direction from the commission or council, whether or not we want to initiate a text amendment application. That doesn't necessarily mean that we will end up making any changes, but it does create a process that staff will begin to research this and bring some ideas, some recommendations to the Planning Commission and potentially to the City Council. So if that's the direction, then we'll start this process. We'll start working on it.
I personally have no desire to look at it at this time, but I'm only one of 5.
And Michael, at least on my side, I'm more interested in how many individuals fall in the category that they could not have a flag lot because of how it is currently written. I would be just not so much in looking on how to allow a variance, but more so how many different areas, or if we can pinpoint where this is a bigger problem or what we're seeing. And I'd be more interested in learning about that than deciding exactly on how to rewrite this yet, to see if it's a big enough problem that overall in the city we need to find a solution for.
We could, without initiating an application, we could certainly study this issue a little closer, bring some more, data to the table for consideration. Again, we were just looking at, is this now a good time to relook at this? It sounds like, even though we don't have agreement on what to do, sounds like maybe a majority of the voices I'm hearing are saying, let's relook at it.
Adam, and then we'll go to Clint, and then back to Brody, and I think Sherry was on there as well, but Adam?
I'm comfortable looking at it. I think we have many other areas we need to address. like our single family ordinances and our multifamily ordinances. So I personally would rather wait to get those done first and then move on.
Okay, Clint.
Adam, we're going to have the single family design standards on next week's planning commission meeting for discussion.
Great.
Okay.
Clint.
Honestly, I was going to really say things along the line of Adam, and that is, you know, I don't mind looking at it. I don't think it's a priority, certainly right now. As Adam just brought up, I think there's a lot of other things that rise to our priority task list to do it. But I think it's worth looking at because there are areas that potentially be affected, and one lens maybe to view that through is kind of to your point, Chris, of what areas is this truly, you know, affect is maybe using the lens that Adam brought up, and I know that he's brought that up before, and really looking at those parcels that have had an opportunity to develop or to subdivide, you know, in some manner, and those that haven't, and those that might, you know, fall under that. But that might be a lens to use, again, without going through a full rewrite, to understand exactly what land we are potentially, or how much land we are potentially talking about that may be affected in the city.
Sherry?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a top priority either. I just, again, I just always think that when this was actually originally passed, Craig was my rep at the time, and I spoke with him about this with my deep concern about this for exactly this reason, and asked him to please make sure that there was language in this that just simply allowed a process that you could appeal, or, you know, just some sort of variance in there, so that if you're just outside of the box we've created, that there's some sort of avenue that you can go down. And that's the only thing I would request is just make sure that we have an avenue. There's people that don't fit our boxes.
All right, Brody.
Yeah, I was just gonna, you know, agree with what everyone said. I think there should be a variance, and I think the integrity of the surrounding parcels is one that I'd focus on, because yeah, I don't want to change the integrity of, you know, everybody else is invested in a specific area because of how it's configured, how the lot sizes are. But if there's circumstances like Sherry's is a great example, where everything else has been developed around her and she's kind of sitting on an island, that makes sense to have some way that she can move forward.
All right. Well, at least some of what I'm hearing, and at least my thoughts, Michael, are that it's probably not a priority right now, but something we want to look at, and more so in pinpointing if there's areas where considering flag lots in those areas where they're not allowed will make more sense. Because I know I look at this and I don't consider Rose Canyon Road a area that we would really consider changing the ordinance for. And so, but if we can pinpoint areas where there's someone sitting there with 3 or 4 or 5 acres or 2.5, 3 acres, and it's like, okay, this may be some areas where we have 5 of them here, and next to them are all 10,000 square foot lots. And so this may be an area where it makes more sense to see if we can find or rewrite the ordinance where there's certain areas or zones that this is allowed to still occur in or something. So maybe there's a way to do it that way.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Are there any other remarks that anyone would like to share at this time? All right, then we'll look at future meetings. Planning Commission meeting will be Thursday, August 6th, 2020 at 7 p.m. The next City Council meeting will be Wednesday, August 12th, 2020 at 7 p.m. And then I need to look for a motion to adjourn at this time.
So moved.
So moved by Mayor Watts, and then instead of all in favor, I'll just say any opposed. And if there's no one in opposition, then I will close the meeting at this time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.